If someone has ever asked you, "How are you doing?" have you ever said, "I am so tired"? But when you say you are tired, are you saying you're sleepy or are you fatigued? Now, often we use these words interchangeably as though they were the same thing, but they are not. And if we are going to power up, we need to be able to identify whether that feeling of tiredness is because of sleepiness or because of fatigue. Let's start with sleepiness. Sleepiness is an expression of a physiological need. That's a big word, but just think of it like hunger and thirst. Hunger and thirst tell us that the body needs food and water, and sleepiness is telling us that the body needs sleep. Fatigue, on the other hand, is all about energy. All our body organs, muscles, and brain, they need energy so that they can do what we need them to do. Now, when we work, whether we use our muscles or our brain, we use our energy. And when most or all of that energy is depleted, we feel a weariness that we call fatigue. Now, in order to get our energy back, we need to recuperate, to fill up the tank, if you will. If we don't replenish our energy, we are basically starting with an empty tank. And without energy, we feel fatigued. When we talk about fatigue, we actually use many different words. Some people say they're running out of gas or they feel burnt out. What words do you use to describe this feeling of fatigue? We use different words to describe fatigue because we are trying to describe different types of fatigue. For instance, when we move our muscles or exert effort, we use physical energy and we will be physically fatigued. Our muscles may be sore, or we can't go as fast, or we don't feel as strong. Now, other things like illness and poor health can also contribute to physical fatigue. We can also become mentally fatigued. Mental fatigue results when we use our brain to think and problem solve. We tend to think of fatigue as being the result of physical work, but the brain uses 20% of the body's energy. So someone in an operations or control room would use a great deal of mental energy and, of course, would be mentally fatigued. On the other hand, if your workload is overwhelming, you are in conflict with colleagues, or you are experiencing problems in your personal life, you may be emotionally fatigued. Now, we usually experience emotional fatigue as stress, or say that we are burnt out. We can even become depressed if the situation is ongoing or severe. If you feel you are emotionally fatigued, check out what resources your organization may have for stress management. Now think about your work for a minute. What kind of energy do you use? Is your work mostly physical or mental? Or do you use both mental and physical energy if, for example, you must first decide how to fix a problem and then you use your hands and tools to fix the problem? Even though sleepiness and fatigue describe different things, there is some overlap. For example, in order to have energy, we need enough sleep. When we don't get enough sleep, we feel sleepy, but we will also feel fatigued more quickly because sleep is one of the ways that we fill our energy tank. Sleep is how our brain and muscles recuperate and re-energize. Now, regardless if you say you are tired or sleepy or fatigued, there is one very critical thing to remember. Sleepiness and fatigue cause impairment. An impairment describes a partial or complete loss of function. When you are not alert, you are impaired. Now, researchers in Australia have shown that a person awake for 17 hours is as impaired as someone who has a blood alcohol level of 0.05, which today in many jurisdictions is now beyond the legal limit. But many shift workers are often awake for 24 hours. And the research shows that that would make you impaired beyond 0.08 level of alcohol impairment. So it doesn't matter if you're impaired due to alcohol or sleepiness or fatigue, the outcome will be exactly the same. If someone suggests to a person who is impaired due to alcohol that they shouldn't drive, they may say, "Oh, I'm okay, I didn't drink that much, really, I'm okay to drive." Now, one of the effects of the impairment is that they do not recognize that they are impaired, even when others see the behavior and recognize the impairment. If someone says, "You look tired," or "You should get some sleep before you drive," don't dismiss what they're saying. They will likely be the better judge of how impaired you might be. Another effect of impairment, especially associated with sleepiness, is that even if we are willing to concede that we are a little sleepy, we believe we can shake it off or push through it. This is an especially dangerous belief because when the body recognizes a need for sleep, it will get that sleep, even if you are trying very hard to stay awake. So who of these folks can be impaired? The truth is that impairment is impairment, regardless of the cause: drugs, alcohol, or sleepiness and fatigue. In fact, all of these folks could be impaired if they have used drugs or alcohol excessively or are sleep deprived or fatigued. The question then is, have you ever come to work when you've been sleepy or fatigued? Now, perhaps you've driven when you've been sleepy or fatigued. Perhaps you're under the influence of sleepiness and fatigue today. If so, you are at risk of making a serious error or causing an accident because you are working or driving under the influence of sleepiness and fatigue. You are impaired. Now, many people will protest. They will say, "Oh, I'm used to being tired. I'm tired all the time. It just doesn't affect me anymore." Or they say, "Yeah, I'm a little tired, but I'm not that tired." But we need to beware. The people who say this may have been tired for so long that they no longer recognize how impaired they are. Being sleepy and fatigued just seems normal to them. What about you? Have you become used to feeling tired all the time? Does feeling tired just feel normal to you? Is it possible that you are impaired and you do not even recognize it? Have you been making mistakes, forgetting things, having to reread something you've just read, or perhaps you have little patience in stressful work situations? If so, then it is time to power up. That's Module 1, but let's take a minute to review. When we say we are tired, we may be sleepy because our body is giving us a signal that it needs sleep. Or we may be physically, emotionally, or mentally fatigued because we have consumed our energy and it needs to be replaced. Being sleepy or fatigued affects our ability to function. We may be so sleepy or fatigued that we may actually be impaired. Now here's a quick quiz to review once again what we learned in Module 1. Once you have an answer for each definition, move on to the next slide. The correct answers are shown here on this slide in red. If you had all the correct answers, good for you, go to the next slide. If you didn't get an answer, feel free to go back and review a slide or two and see what you missed. Now let's end this module by focusing on one thing you learned or one thing you want to remember. If you have a notepad, you can write it down so that you are more likely to remember this information. Module 2 is next. You will learn more about sleepiness and strategies to overcome sleepiness.